The phone rang at the Scott family's house. It was Wednesday afternoon, just like every other Wednesday for the past 4 years. Dorothy's mom picked up the phone, already knowing who it would be. "Is Dorothy there?" the creepy voice asked. But Dorothy couldn't answer the phone. She had been dead for 4 years, and her killer was still calling. Imagine this. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, the phone would ring, and every time it was the same chilling question. "Is Dorothy there?" For 4 long years, her killer kept calling, tormenting her family, and leaving everyone to wonder, who was he? And why was he so obsessed with Dorothy? If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And if you're already part of our true crime family, let me know in the comments. Have you ever heard of Dorothy Scott's case before? Dorothy Jane Scott was just like any other 32-year-old mom in California. She lived with her 4-year-old son, Sean, in Stanton, not far from Anaheim. If you met Dorothy, you'd probably remember her kind smile and quiet personality. She wasn't the type of person who went to wild parties or caused drama. In fact, some people even called her life boring. Every day, Dorothy would drop Sean off at her parents' house before heading to work. She worked as a secretary at two connected shops, one called Swinger's Psych Shop, which sold things like lava lamps and beads, and next door was Custom John's head shop. Her dad used to own one of the shops, which is how she got the job. Dorothy was different from the hippie culture around her shops. She didn't drink or do drugs. She went to church regularly and spent most of her free time with her son. Her coworkers said she was super reliable and organized. One friend even joked that Dorothy was as dull as a phone book. But being predictable and responsible was exactly what made her a great mom. Dorothy's life revolved around her son, Sean. She would take him to the park, read him bedtime stories, and tuck him in every night. Her coworkers often saw her smiling as she talked about Sean's latest adventures. But little did she know, her predictable routine was making her an easy target for someone with sinister intentions. But here's the thing about having such a regular routine. It makes it easy for someone to learn your schedule, to know where you'll be and when, to watch you without you knowing. And in early 1980s, someone started watching Dorothy, someone who would turn her ordinary life into a nightmare. It started with strange phone calls at work. A man would call Dorothy, telling her how beautiful she was and how much he loved her. Dorothy told her mom the voice sounded familiar, like someone she'd met before, but she couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was someone who'd been in the shops or a friend of a friend. She just wasn't sure. But these weren't your typical unwanted phone calls. This man knew things, private things. He'd describe what Dorothy was wearing that exact moment. He'd mention where she'd been earlier that day. It was clear someone was following her, watching her every move. But it didn't stop there. The stalker seemed to know everything: her favorite coffee order, the route she took to work, even the song she hummed under her breath. It was as if he had been living in her shadow, invisible but always there. Dorothy started to feel like she was being watched everywhere she went. She would glance over her shoulder in parking lots, double-check her locks at night, and even change her route to work. But no matter what she did, the calls kept coming. The stalker was always one step ahead, as if he knew her every move before she made it. Then one day the caller told Dorothy to go outside. He had left something for her. There on her car's windshield was a single dead rose. The rose was wilted, its petals blackened and crumbling. But what scared Dorothy the most was the note tucked beneath it. In jagged handwriting it read, "You can't escape me." She tore the note into pieces, but the message stayed with her. The stalker wasn't just watching, he was sending her a warning. Dorothy's mom later said this scared her daughter more than anything else. The stalker wasn't just watching from afar anymore. He was getting closer. The calls got worse, much worse. One day the man's voice changed from loving to threatening. His exact words were, "Okay, now you're going to come my way, and when I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you." Dorothy was terrified. She thought about buying a gun, but worried about having one in the house with her young son. Instead, she started taking karate lessons, hoping she could learn to defend herself if she needed to. But nothing could prepare Dorothy for what would happen on May 28, 1980. That night, Dorothy's life would take a terrifying turn. She had no idea that her kindness, offering to drive a sick coworker to the hospital, would lead her straight into the hands of her stalker. And she had no way of knowing that a simple change of scarves would later prove just how closely he had been watching her. It started as a normal Wednesday. She had no way of knowing that a simple change of scarves, from black to red, would later prove that her killer was watching her every move that night. May 28, 1980, Wednesday night. Dorothy dropped her son Sean off at her parents' house and headed to work for a staff meeting at 9 p.m. Nobody knew this would be the last time her parents would see her alive. During the meeting, Dorothy noticed something was wrong with her coworker, Conrad. His arm was swollen and red, and he looked really sick. Being the caring person she was, Dorothy immediately offered to drive him to the hospital. Another coworker, Pam, decided to come along. Here's where things get strange. On the way to the hospital, Dorothy stopped at her parents' house to tell them she'd be late. While she was there, she did something that seemed totally normal at the time. She changed her black scarf for a red one. This tiny detail would later prove that her killer was watching her that night. At the hospital, doctors found out Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. Dorothy and Pam sat in the waiting room together the whole time, reading magazines and talking. Pam later said Dorothy never made any phone calls or left her side. Remember this detail? It becomes important later. Around 11 p.m., Conrad was ready to leave. Dorothy told her friends she'd bring her white Toyota station wagon around to the front of the hospital so Conrad wouldn't have to walk far. She went to the bathroom first, then headed to the parking lot. What happened in those next few minutes would change everything. Dorothy stepped into the parking lot, unaware that someone was waiting for her. Someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. But who was it? And what did they want? What happened next still gives people chills. Pam and Conrad waited at the hospital entrance. Suddenly, they saw Dorothy's car coming toward them. But something was wrong. The headlights were blinding, the engine roaring like a beast. The car swerved wildly, tires screeching against the pavement. For a moment, it seemed like it might crash into them. But then it veered sharply and disappeared into the night, leaving Pam and Conrad standing in stunned silence. What had just happened? And where was Dorothy? Pam and Conrad stood frozen, their hearts racing. They had just witnessed something horrifying, but they couldn't make sense of it. Was Dorothy in the car? Was she hurt? Or was it someone else behind the wheel? Someone far more dangerous? The questions swirled in their minds, but there were no answers. Only the sound of the car's engine fading into the distance. The headlights were blazing bright, and the car was speeding. They couldn't see who was driving. They waved their arms, trying to get Dorothy's attention, but the car just swerved around them and raced out of the parking lot. At first, they thought maybe something had happened with Dorothy's son, and she had to rush home. But when they called her parents, Sean was fine, and Dorothy wasn't there. Hours passed. No Dorothy, no answers. Then, at 4:30 in the morning, police found Dorothy's car. It was 10 miles away from the hospital, abandoned in an alley, and it was on fire. Dorothy was nowhere to be found. But this isn't even the creepiest part of the story. What happened next would torment Dorothy's family for years to come, and it all started with a phone call 1 week after she vanished. A week after Dorothy disappeared, her mom Vera was home alone when the phone rang. The voice on the other end asked, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" When Vera said yes, the man simply said, "I've got her," and hung up. The police had told Dorothy's parents to keep quiet, to not talk to newspapers. They thought it might help them catch whoever took Dorothy. But after that terrifying call, Dorothy's dad couldn't stay silent anymore. He went to the local newspaper, the Santa Ana Register, and told them everything. That's when things got even creepier. The same day the newspaper ran the story, the killer called the newspaper's editor. His exact words were, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." Now, lots of people call newspapers claiming to be killers, but this guy proved he was real. He knew things that weren't in the newspaper, like how Dorothy had changed from a black scarf to a red one that night, and about Conrad's spider bite. He even claimed Dorothy had called him from the hospital. But remember, Pam said Dorothy never made any calls that night. But the worst part? The calls didn't stop. Criminologists who've studied the case believe the killer's behavior was a classic example of power and control. He wasn't just killing Dorothy, one expert said. He was tormenting her family, making sure they knew he was still out there, still watching. It was psychological torture. Every single Wednesday afternoon, for 4 years, the killer would call Dorothy's parents' house. He knew exactly when Dorothy's mom would be home alone. Sometimes he'd ask, "Is Dorothy there?" Other times he'd say he had her, or that he'd killed her. The police tried to trace the calls, but the killer was smart. He never stayed on the line long enough. They recorded his voice, but nobody could recognize it. He was disguising it, making it sound rough and strange. The calls finally stopped in April 1984 when Dorothy's dad answered the phone instead of her mom. The killer hung up immediately. Maybe he was afraid Dorothy's dad would recognize his voice, but the silence wouldn't last long. Because 3 months later, on a hot August morning, a construction worker made a discovery that would finally answer one question. What happened to Dorothy Scott? But it would also create many more mysteries. August 6, 1984. A construction worker named Jesse Lauza was joking with his crew, telling them to watch out for dead bodies as they started digging. Minutes later, he wasn't laughing anymore. What he found in the brush near Santa Ana Canyon Road would finally bring some answers to Dorothy's family. There, partially hidden in the ground, were human bones. But that's not all. There were dog bones too, deliberately placed on top of the human remains. Near the bones, investigators found two important items: a turquoise ring and a watch. The watch had stopped at exactly 12:30 a.m. on May 29, 1980, just 1 hour after Dorothy's car had sped away from the hospital. But here's the strange part. Investigators found no signs of a struggle in Dorothy's car. No fingerprints, no blood, no evidence of a fight. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. So what really happened in that parking lot? And why did the killer stop the watch at 12:30? Was it a message or just a cruel coincidence? Some investigators believe the watch stopping at 12:30 a.m. was a deliberate act, a way for the killer to mark the exact moment Dorothy's life ended. But why? Was it a twisted way to commemorate the crime, or was it a clue meant to taunt investigators? We may never know. Dorothy's mom identified the ring as her daughter's, and dental records confirmed what everyone feared. They had found Dorothy. But the discovery left investigators with more questions than answers. But here's the really strange part. After Dorothy's remains were found, the killer started calling again. He called the Scott house and asked once more, "Is Dorothy there?" It's like he was playing some kind of sick game. So who could have done this? The police looked at several possibilities. First, they checked Dorothy's ex-husband, Dennis Terry, Sean's father. But he was in Missouri the whole time with solid proof he was there. Then there was Mike Butler, someone who came up years later as a possible suspect. His sister worked at the same shop as Dorothy, and he lived in the mountains near where Dorothy's remains were found. Some say he was involved in strange religious practices, which might explain the dog bones. But police never had enough evidence to charge him, and he died in 2014. Some believe Mike Butler's strange religious practices might explain the dog bones found with Dorothy's remains. Could they have been part of a ritual? Or was it a twisted way to throw investigators off the trail? Others think the killer might have been someone closer to home, a coworker, a customer from the shop, or even a friend Dorothy trusted. But without concrete evidence, the truth remains buried. Some even wonder if the killer could have been a customer from the shops where Dorothy worked. After all, the stalker seemed to know intimate details about her life, details only someone who had observed her closely would know. Was it someone she had casually interacted with, or was it a stranger who had been watching her for months? Some people wonder if the Golden State Killer might have done this. He was active in California at the time and known for stalking victims and making scary phone calls. But he was caught in 2018, and Dorothy's case was never linked to him. Today, more than 40 years later, Dorothy Scott's case remains unsolved. Her parents never got the answers they desperately wanted. Her father passed away in '94, on Dorothy's birthday. Her mother died in 2002. Both of them went to their graves not knowing who killed their daughter. For Dorothy's parents, the pain was unbearable. Every Wednesday, they would brace themselves for the phone to ring, dreading the sound of that same chilling voice. It wasn't just a call, it was a reminder that the man who took their daughter was still out there, still watching, still in control. And for Sean, growing up without a mother, the unanswered questions haunted him every day. Why her? Why us? He would ask. But there were no answers, only silence. Dorothy's son, Sean, who was just 4 when his mom disappeared, grew up and has a family of his own now. He still hopes that someday someone will come forward with information about what happened to his mother. What makes Dorothy's case different from other unsolved murders is how the killer didn't just disappear after the crime. For 4 long years, he tormented her family with those Wednesday phone calls. He wanted them to know he was still there, still watching, still in control. Think about this. Dorothy did everything right. When she noticed something was wrong with her coworker that night, she didn't hesitate to help. She made sure to tell her parents where she was going. She wasn't alone. She had 2 friends with her. But none of that mattered to someone who had been planning to take her life. Sometimes the smallest details in a case are the most chilling. Like a scarf changed from black to red, a watch stopped at 12:30, or a phone that rang every Wednesday for 4 years. These details remind us that Dorothy wasn't just another statistic. She was a real person, a loving mother, a caring daughter, and a good friend who deserves so much better. If you found this story important, please share it. Someone out there might know something about Dorothy's case. Dorothy's story is a tragic reminder of how quickly stalking can escalate. If you or someone you know is being stalked, don't wait. Speak up, seek help, and document everything. Your actions could save a life. And if you have any information about Dorothy's case, no matter how small, please come forward. Her family deserves justice, and her story deserves to be solved. And if you're dealing with a stalker, don't wait. Tell someone, get help, and document everything. The resources for stalking victims are in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that need to be told. And let me know in the comments, what case would you like me to cover next? Your suggestions could be the next story we dive into.
If you have any information about Dorothy Scott's disappearance, no matter how small, please contact the Anaheim Police Department. Let's help bring justice for Dorothy and closure for her family.
This has been the story of Dorothy Scott, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't strangers in the dark, but someone watching, waiting, and hiding in plain sight. Dorothy's case is a chilling example of how danger can come from the most unexpected places, even from someone who might seem harmless at first glance. Her story teaches us several important lessons. For parents, it's a reminder to always be aware of your surroundings and to trust your instincts. If something or someone feels off, don't ignore that feeling. Teach your children about personal safety and the importance of speaking up if they ever feel threatened or followed. Dorothy's story is a stark reminder that danger can come from the most unexpected places. It's not always the stranger in the dark. It could be someone you know, someone you trust, someone who seems harmless at first glance. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and never ignore the warning signs. For kids and young adults, Dorothy's story is a wake-up call to be vigilant. If you're being stalked or harassed, don't wait to seek help. Tell someone you trust, document everything, and consider taking self-defense classes. It's better to be prepared than to live in fear. For families, Dorothy's case shows the importance of staying connected. Keep track of each other's schedules, check in regularly, and always have a plan in case something goes wrong. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like Dorothy's family, receiving threatening calls or messages, don't hesitate to involve the authorities immediately. But Dorothy's story is just one of many unsolved mysteries that continue to baffle investigators and haunt families to this day. What about the case of the Somerton man, a man found dead on an Australian beach with a cryptic code in his pocket that has never been cracked? Or the disappearance of Brian Schaffer, a medical student who vanished into thin air after walking into a bar and was never seen again? These are just a few of the countless mysteries that remain unsolved, each one more baffling than the last. And if you think Dorothy's case is chilling, wait until you hear about the Somerton man, a body found on an Australian beach with a cryptic code in his pocket that has never been cracked. Could this be the case that finally gets solved? Don't miss it. If you're as captivated by these stories as I am, you won't want to miss what's coming next. From cold cases that have stumped detectives for decades to bizarre disappearances that defy logic, we're diving deep into the world's most haunting unsolved mysteries. But here's the thing, if you're not subscribed, you risk missing out on these chilling tales. So hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now, because in the world of true crime, the next story is always more shocking than the last. And who knows, the next mystery we uncover might just be the one that changes everything. And trust me, you don't want to be the one who misses out on the mystery that could finally be solved, or the one that leaves us with even more questions. Even today, more than 40 years later, the question remains, who was the man behind those Wednesday phone calls? Was he someone Dorothy knew, or a stranger hiding in plain sight? The answer may still be out there, waiting to be uncovered.